All right, LifePoint, what is going on? Hi, there we go. Thank you very much. It is great to be here. I'm Brett, one of the pastors, and glad that you're here with us. If this is your first Sunday at LifePoint, you picked a great Sunday to join us. You get a chance to hear a little bit about our heartbeat. I think look behind the curtain a little bit about our desire to give ourselves away for the sake of others. I think you'll hear a little bit about our desire to live counterculturally, to live and experience the most of who God has called us to be as a church. But I want to start actually by looking back a little bit, back to when I was a kid, right? When I was a kid, I imagine when you were a kid, we have certain images in our minds about what it is to have the good life, right? What does it look like to make it in this world? And, I'm basically 40. My wife thinks I'm being dramatic when I say that, but I know how math works. I'm a realist. I'm rounding up, basically 40. As a child of the 80s, and as I think about the things that shaped my picture of the good life, right? Family and neighbors and TV, right? And I think about two things specifically in combination, the Seavers and the Keatons, right? If you're here in the 80s, if you weren't around in the 80s to see Alex P. Keaton and the Seaver, Mike Seaver and the families, all I can do is hope that you get an opportunity that they bring it to Netflix or something back for you. But whether that family is, for you, the Cosbys or the Winslows or the Dumfies or, maybe even the Bluths, whatever that might look like, we're shaped by the images we see on TV. We're shaped by our neighbors, by our family expectations. As I was thinking back about what the good life looked like to me when I was a 12-year-old, I think about three things. The first was a spare bedroom. Right? I grew up with an older brother, and I was always arguing with him that I should have the other bedroom. He had the bigger bedroom. I thought, Ryan, we should rotate here, right? We should change every 6 months, every year, something. They never changed once, right? And so this idea that, sometimes have a spare bedroom, like this was a game changer for me. I knew that that's what I wanted one day. Or the second thing that comes to my mind is a new car, right? 3 words, new car smell. I'd heard about it. I wanted to experience it for myself. And the third thing that for me was, I think, an image or an idea in my 12-year-old mind about what it looked like to make it was a boat. Now, the thing is, I don't boat. In fact, I don't even fish. I don't do water. I mean, I drink water. I need it to survive. But I don't recreate on water, so to speak. It's not really where I feel most comfortable. But somehow, my neighbor had a boat growing up. And he loved that boat. And he waxed that boat. He told stories about that boat. He liked to show off that boat. And so somehow in my psyche as a kid, that boat came to represent the good life. It came to represent free time and recreation and great stories. I don't think it's just limited to us as kids. As adults today, we probably have some image in our mind that we think of when we think about what it means to make it. Some of you are working very hard day in and day out to make it. So some of you are already there maybe. You're living the dream. This is what you were hoping for as a kid. Some of us, we feel that pressure. We feel that daily pressure to make it, to get those things. And I want to let you in a little secret this morning. I'm not playing that game anymore. My 12-year-old self might be disappointed as he looks at my life because I don't have any of those things. But I found something so much more. I've found something so much more meaningful. And the truth of it is that I've come to discover that the good life is not found in the abundance of things. And I don't regret stepping out of that game for a moment. Join me this morning. We're going to be in Luke chapter 12. It'll be on page 871 if you grab one of the house Bibles. As always, it's our gift to you if you need a Bible that you can read and you can make your own. Last week, we kicked off our series called Beyond, right? And one of the ways that we kicked it off was really asking this question, why? Why this season? Why this project as a church, this building? Why this discipleship project, this discipleship process that we're working together through as a church? Why us? Why now? Why bother, right? And we asked this question. We ultimately found the answer in who God is. That our God is this God who is able to do abundantly more, above and beyond more, infinitely more than we could think or ask or imagine. And this God who has everything good and sovereign that he is He went first. He gave his one and only son. He was generous to us in Jesus Christ. And that changes everything. The heart of God is what this season is about for us as a church. This morning, as we continue this series, I want to share that God does want you to experience the good life, but it may not be found where we usually look for it. Let's look together in Luke chapter 12, beginning in verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Now, I get, as a younger brother, I get this question. But Jesus said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops.' And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and I'll build larger ones. And there I will store all of my grain and all of my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Rest, relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you. And the things that you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself, but is not rich towards God.'" Jesus is telling us something here. We need a new scorecard in life. We need a scorecard. I think we all, in one way or another, understand the need for a scorecard. We want to measure things. We want to see how we're doing. You probably experienced some version of this in organizational life, in your business. Maybe you think about it individually as well. We want to know if we're winning. So for example, as a church, most churches count the 3 B's: buildings, budget, and rear ends in the seats. I have a 3 and 5-year-old. I can't say the other word. That's how we measure how we're doing. But the truth is, those aren't the most meaningful things in the church. In fact, not even close. But we're drawn to what we can easily measure. It gives us, I think, a sense of control. It gives us a sense that we can, well, if I do this, if I change that, maybe I'll see a different output here. It gives us this illusion that it's up to us. And so as a church, our staff and elders have talked about that the church needs a new scorecard. Not just about budgets and buildings and people and seats. It's, well, our disciples being made, our lives being transformed. Our disciples who walk with us, are they growing in their relationship with Jesus? We introduced last week on page 20 of your booklet that gospel wheel. As the gospel works its way inside out in our lives, are we seeing those changes? Are people being equipped and sent out on the mission in our city and around the world because of LifePoint? We want to be more interested in our sending capacity than in our seating capacity as a church. We need a new scorecard. And it's not just churches, not just businesses and organizations. Honestly, I think for each of us individually, the same could be said for us. We need a new scorecard in life because we're measuring our life by what we can possess. We're judging the good life based on the abundance of our stuff. So we hear Jesus in verse 15. What did he say? One's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. Here's our word again. If you were here last week, we introduced this word. It's the word that our series is named after, beyond. In Greek, it's perisevo, and it can be translated beyond. It can be translated as an abundance, to excel in something, to go above and beyond. And Jesus is clear, the good life is not found in having the abundance of things, going above and beyond in the stuff of life. Our scorecard for life can't simply measure our 401k, our retirement investments, our net worth. Truth is, though, I think when you begin to try to put this in practice, to live a little bit differently, those things are pretty easy to measure. You know what's hard to measure? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness. And so we default to what's easy to measure, and we fall for the lie as we do that that what I have is the best measure of who I am. And Jesus waves his hands. Nothing could be further from the truth. But we get in our culture, a twisted view of wealth. And many of you have experienced this. I've experienced this. I got a whole closet at home full of this, right? We shop for therapy all of a sudden. We shop to feel better about ourselves, to boister down on our identity. And for you, maybe it's clothes. Maybe it's gadgets. You know, people at Apple, they get this. Every year there's a new iPhone, so you feel dissatisfied with what you got. You invest in something more. It's cool for a week, and then we're back down to, I kind of like 7, the 5. Maybe it's cars or motorized toys, ATVs, gators. What is that stuff that for us we fill our lives with? We shop as a way to double down on our image. For me, it's books, right? I've never met a book I couldn't use. I see them out there in the wild. I see them in the bookstores, and they're like pets that need to be rescued. I need to bring them into a home and give them a safe place, right? The reality, though, is that our possessions, we use them to ensure our image. And for me, I want to be knowledgeable. I want to be able to speak on different subjects, and books make me feel good about that. Maybe for you, you want to feel like you're always ready, no matter what happens in life, so you have security and comfort. Or maybe for you, you use money and these possessions to give an image that you're up with it, right? You're fashionable. For some of us, we want to use that stuff to say, I'm always ready for a good time. I got entertainment all around me. Truth is that as our self-image is wrapped up in our stuff, we begin to shop for sport. And so it's no wonder that as a culture, we are enslaved to debt. That's a strong word. I get it, right? And I use it very intentionally because that's the very same way that the Bible talks about our relationship to debt. In Proverbs, it says, the borrower is slave to the lender. The truth is, that's us, right? Nobody wants to raise their hand and say that, but we, as a culture, in general, we live like that. In general, an American household lives on 110% of their combined family household income. That's normative. That's the way of life. And for very few of us is that debt because we're just struggling to make ends meet. We just got to get food on the table. For most of us, we are indebted because we just want more stuff, maybe to feel a little bit better, maybe to sharpen our image in this world a little bit, to keep up with the neighbors. Our stuff's about status. Look, this is not abundant living. This is our stuff owning us. And church, I think this is a place that we, if we are followers of Jesus, are called to be counter-cultural. This is a place where we are called to be weird, right? Sometimes Christians are weird for all the wrong reasons. This is a place where Christians can be weird for the right reason. Because Jesus promises there is so much more to life than what money can provide for you. There's a whole nother and better scorecard out there. And Jesus warns us against the dangers of money and wealth. Well, almost as much as anything. He talks about money and wealth and warns us about its pervasive powers in our heart more than he talks about marriage, more than he talks about heaven and hell combined. And while, I don't know about you, but while I'm still reeling from this statement where he says one's life is not found in the abundance of possessions, Jesus hits us with this parable, right? Verses 16 through 21, and he ends it with this statement in verse 21. It gives us this idea that we can be rich towards ourselves and poor towards God. That there's a way of living in which we are rich towards ourselves and poor towards God. And the issue here isn't about being rich or being poor. The issue here is an issue of the heart. And Jesus challenges us. He gives us a different scorecard. He challenges us with a different question. Think about your life. Who is your treasure for? Who is your treasure for? Is it for you and for your pleasure? Or is it for God and God's purposes on earth? And for most of us, I can't answer for you, but I know for myself, I didn't even know there was another option. Right? Of course it's for me. This is just what we know from day one. This is how most of us live. The mantra of our culture is the more wealth that we have, the richer that we can become towards ourselves. The more that we make, the greater our standard of living. The golden calf of our culture. The more wealth I have, the greater my standard of living. But Jesus, again, that new scorecard. You'd say, well, what about your standard of giving? Listen, what do we spend more time obsessing over? What about you? Do you spend more time thinking about your standard of living? How you're rich towards yourselves? How you're rewarding yourself for things in life? Or your standard of giving? How you can be rich towards God? How you're using your resources to be a part of what God wants to do in our city, in our world, through the local church, and through other organizations in our city? When we stop seeing our money as an opportunity to be rich towards ourselves, we start to find a way to be rich to God. We start to find a way to honor God and to recognize whose all this stuff is anyway. We start to ask, God, how do I use this for your purposes? How does these blessings in my life, how do they spill over to bless others around me? How have you positioned me to leverage what you've given me for your glory here in our city? Right? This is a complete reorientation of our hearts and the way our hearts relate to our stuff. And this reorientation, it reminds us that life is not found in the abundance of possession. So where is it found? Jesus is pretty clear. Let me read John 10 through 11 to you. Jesus says, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they might have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. We are called to a life beyond me, right? Me-centered living comes naturally to most of us. We don't have to be taught it. It doesn't have to be explained to us. That's just our default. But the irony is that the more we get caught up in me, the more we miss out on who God designed that me to be. The way that he wants to use us to be a blessing, the way that he wants to use us for his purposes in our city, for his purposes right here in our church. Abundant living begins where I end. For many of us, we never experience abundant living because we never end. It's always centered around us, but Jesus says, abundant living is found in me. Again, it's our word, perisevo, beyond. Jesus calls us to experience a life beyond ourselves, a life beyond our stuff. He calls us to a life beyond our limitations and a life beyond our fears. And it's right there in that moment that we begin to depend on him. And we learn that in him, we have so much more than all the things this world could ever offer us. Jesus secured abundant life for us, not by seeking to live his best life now. He didn't do it by claiming his rights and his privileges and his benefits. No, it's just the opposite, right? How did he save us? He gave us abundant life with the Father by laying his life down, by an act of self-giving love, of life-giving sacrifice. He had rights and privileges and benefits, all of them of heaven, and he has set them aside to come and rescue us. LifePoint, are our hearts transformed? Are they transformed by the gospel? Or are they shaped into that same gospel pattern, that same gospel trajectory? Are we willing to give of ourselves that others might live? Are we willing to get off the ladder, to stop worrying about upward mobility and embrace the downward mobility of the cross? That others might experience blessing, that others might experience new life, that others might experience joy. Or do we look for joy? Do we look for our purpose? Do we look for the meaning of life anywhere else? It'll only disappoint us. For me, as I take inventory of my own heart, as I take inventory of my own fears and concerns, my own ambitions, for me, this is a trust issue. Do I trust in my own ability to make myself happy more than I trust in God's ability to care for me and provide for me? Do I trust my own way of managing my resources more than I trust God's way of managing my resources? Do I think that I'll do better with 100% my way than I do it with 90% or 85% God's way? And the backwards math of the gospel is we do it better God's way if we have 5% of our own stuff. If we do it with any of our own way, we do it better God's way. The question that crushes my heart in this moment, the question that sinks me as I'm thinking about that, is, do I actually think that money can do anything for me better than Jesus can? I mean, think for a moment about what you're using your money for. Some good stuff, some important stuff, right? Future security, present comfort, sometimes influence, realistically, sometimes opportunity, whether it's educational, experiential. Do I think that I can do with that money better for me than Jesus can do for me? In all of those areas. And if the answer is yes, let me say, right now we need to check our hearts. We need to do it fast. God has given you a moment to repent and to turn to Him, because money is not the source of life. Money is not the source of abundance in your life. It's a thief. And if the answer is no, if we know that Jesus is better, the question before us is, do we live like it? Do we live like Jesus is better, the things that money can provide for us? Do we live like our future is more secure in Him, our joy is more abundant in Him? Will you trust? Do you trust Him in that moment? I want to ask you to check out a testimony of one family seeking to move away from fear, to move away from control, and move towards trust in this season in the life of our church.
My name is Wendy Kuntz.
My name is Tim Kuntz. And I first came to LifePoint when we had a Bible study in our home, and a group of people 6 or 7 months in said, hey, we're being led to start a church. One of our friends kind of had it laid on his heart to start something new, and after months of us kind of gnashing about whether we were supposed to be a part of this or not, I think God laid it on our hearts, and it became clear that this was something we were supposed to do, something we were supposed to be a part of, and something that would soon change our lives. When I think about the defining moment for me at LifePoint, I think for a lot of people, they probably think the defining moment is, wow, you were part of the group that started the church. The area that has really defined my growth in my relationship with Jesus Christ has really been through conflict and conflict resolution at church. It was a very difficult time. It put a lot of strain on our marriage. It put a lot of strain on just getting through every day and attending church on Sunday morning.
My prayer life became so fierce because I was scared, and I didn't know. I didn't understand. And so God began working on my heart. First, I think he loved on me, and he came alongside and just gently loved on me. And then he taught me to gently reach out to Tim and walk alongside him and gently encourage him in his faith, encourage him in his walk. But I think God taught us both so much. He taught me dependence on Him, on God, not dependence on Tim, dependence on God.
When it's been difficult to give, it's oftentimes when we don't have a lot of information, when we're ignorant to the situation, when we're frustrated by something that's going on. And we have to, I think, pull back and think about what, the church is made up of a bunch of people, and a bunch of people who are very committed to serving Jesus Christ and very committed to advancing the gospel. And oftentimes people are very passionate about how that's done and what that looks like. And I think oftentimes we can get wrapped up in, oh, I don't like that, or I'm not comfortable with that, or I'm not sure about that, or I'm not sure we need that. And I think we allow our fears and our desire to control to hold back. And I think where God's pressing into Wendy and I is to say, why don't you trust me? Why don't you let go? Why don't you just trust that I've got this? That the God of the universe is big enough to handle the finances of LifePoint. And if we turn over what we're responsible to turn over to God, that He can take care of that. And so I think it's a lesson for us, and we want to make sure, we want to be sure, we want to be good stewards. We're very, very interested in all of those things, but I think in this season, we're being pressed in by God to say, but do you trust me? Do you trust me? Forget about man. Do you trust me? And I think that's where God's saying, I'm going to challenge you on this. And I think we're being challenged.
I think He has huge plans for us right there at our new site, and I'm super excited to be able to be a part of that.
We see lives being changed, and so it's not about LifePoint, it's about people's relationship with Jesus Christ and seeing them acting on their faith and acting out their faith and how they think God is calling them to be obedient. And so it's easy to get behind something when you see lives being impacted and lives being changed, and we see that at LifePoint.
Now, if you don't know Tim and Wendy, Tim's one of our elders here at LifePoint, and I'm thankful for his vulnerability in this moment because it helps us to realize that we're in the same boat. For our elders, for our staff, for our pastors, this is a moment. This is a moment of our hearts before God, wrestling with this question: will you trust me? When you can't be in control, when we don't have the influence, when we are still trying to dot our T's and cross our I's. Well, ultimately, what we do with our money, it's a question of who do we trust? And I'm thankful to be able to say today that I don't stand up here alone. I stand up here with all of our elders and our staff and their families who've said, I'm in. 100% in. They're in this special season in the life of our church. And that wanting to be a part of what God is doing in this season, that's not a small thing. That's not a small commitment for our elders. It's not a small sacrifice for them. We're wrestling through the issues of the heart. We're being discipled in this moment as much as any of us are. But ultimately, we've had to lay it down and say, God, it's about you. It's not about me. This is about you, and I'm trusting you. For my family and for many of the elders here at LifePoint, I know that this is the largest gift that they've ever given as a family. The largest financial investment they've ever given to a church or any other nonprofit. And man, that is scary. I don't say that as a pat on the back. I say it because it is scary. It's scary when we're not in control. It's scary when we don't have the influence. It's scary when it's not about us. And the truth is, for several of our elders, they won't be elders in a year from now. Several more of them will rotate off a few years from now. It's not like they have forever dominion over what's happening. Ultimately, we have to say, God, I'm putting this in your hands, and I'm going to trust you. And I'm going to trust you with our next elders. I'm going to trust you in the next season of the life of our church. And ultimately, we believe this is a legacy season for our church. We're praying for an impact beyond the walls of a church, but also beyond a generation. That long after I'm gone, God is still using this place and using our kingdom investment to change hearts and lives for Jesus Christ. And that kids that I'll never meet and neighbors and people from our city that I'll never have a chance to know will have their lives changed by what's happening here. This has to be bigger than us. I think I can speak for each of our elders and our staff in this moment to say that we're being stretched. We're being called to grow. We're being called to grow into what it looks like to have a gospel-shaped life, to have our lives shaped after the self-giving love of Jesus. We're being grown in what it looks like to follow God into generosity and all the hard issues that go along with it. And we're being stretched when it comes to trust. I think this is a season about our hearts. And so that's why I'm so excited that we're giving you guys, and together as a church, we're going through an opportunity, not just to see this as a simple building campaign, but to see this as an opportunity to grow in our discipleship. If you have that booklet, turn over to page 22 with me. I'm excited about this really discipleship tool that we introduced last week called Generosity Journey, because I think this is a journey of trust. God, where am I now, and where are you asking me to go? The first question, where are you now? I would encourage you to look over that little graph and that map and say, where am I now? Right? Maybe you're new to LifePoint, or maybe you've been here for a while and you've never given before. I get it. That is a scary thing for many of us, a scary idea, a scary part of our discipleship. Maybe in this season you're being asked to trust and to say, well, maybe I'll give for the first time. And we celebrate that. That is not a small act. That is an act of trust. That's an act of obedience. That's a big thing. Or maybe in this season you've given once or twice. You've given if you've had some left over, but you don't give regularly. Maybe in this season the ask of you, that step of trust, is to become a regular giver, to say, hey, I'm going to prioritize generosity to my local church in my life, and I'm going to give regularly. Whether it's weekly, whether it's monthly, it doesn't matter, but I'm just saying I want to be a part of this as a habit, as a discipline. Our hearts are shaped by disciplines. And so when we take our generosity from a one-time thing or an occasional thing to a habit, a practice, a discipline, it changes things in the way that we view God and the gifts that he's given us. Or maybe you've given regularly and you feel the call. You'll step out to trust to become an intentional giver in this season. Right? This is hearing Paul as he tells us to decide beforehand what we're going to give in 2 Corinthians. Are we giving intentionally? The reality is a lot of us don't know what we give because it's kind of just whatever's left over at the end of the month. And to grow into an intentional giver, it's actually, I'm going to give a percentage of my income at the very beginning. I'm going to give this knowing and trusting God that he'll make the ends meet. That's a scary place to be, whether it's 5% of your income, 10%, 15%. But it's kind of saying, God, I want to do this first. I want to make a priority of this in my budget, just like I will with any other number I live with. Maybe that next step, sacrificial giving. Now that's a scary one, because if we were comfortable at a certain percentage, this is asking us to go to a percentage where we're uncomfortable, where we have to say no to other things, maybe good things in our life, in order to say yes to this moment and what God's calling us to do in our church in this season. Are you being asked to become a sacrificial giver? Or ultimately, and we talk about the New Testament, what we're called to be is a surrendered giver. That I see all that I have as God's. And so God, monthly, how do you want me to use this with my monthly income? What percentage? How do I give sacrificially there? And with one-time gifts, with my assets, whether it's property or stock, or how do I leverage these for your kingdom in this season? This is not a light conversation. This is not an easy thing for a church, or for any of us really. And Jesus, we shouldn't expect it to be. Jesus said this would be one of the toughest things that we come across. And as I think about generosity, as I think about my next step, I wrestle with this question: is will I be led with faith, or will I be led by fear? And when I'm led by faith, I'm saying, God, I'm counting on you. I'm trusting you. I believe I'll be the blessing you've called me to be when I handle my finances your way. But man, I know the pull of fear. Well, let me make sure I've got this set. Let me make sure I can do this. Let me make sure that I prepared everything on my own. I could do it on my power. I'll do it my way. This will serve me. And ultimately, we have to ask, are we willing to trust God and go out in faith? To be a little countercultural, to do things a little different. So my ask this week is not that you would pretend to be where you're not on this journey. My ask is not that you would pretend to, hey, I'm going to shoot for the sky. And my ask is simply that you would trust to take the next step. In this season in the life of our church, what's that next step look like for you? Wherever you are, will you trust enough just to take that next step?